Hey all. So here we have one of my solos of this last Summer of Pain fight before the finale. I also took this with Masacre and Tigra, but it's actually important to note that in my tactics video on this, where I broke down possible counters, I got something wrong. In my opinion, that's because of some rather confusing verbiage, as I had not taken the fight yet. The node on Ghost, the haunted node that is the core of this fight, says that when the defender dashes back, the attacker is faltered for 3 seconds, period. Then a new sentence says all debuffs are then purified and converted into a 100% fury buff. And then it says that all damage dealt while faltered is reflected back. The way that I read that, and the way that I kind of still want to read it, honestly, is that the falter happens, and at the end of the 3 seconds, all debuffs are purified, converted into furies, and damage is reflected. If that was the way this fight worked, then basically all sources of damage over time would have been really dangerous. And Mysterio would have been significantly harder to use, but still pretty good. Masacre would have been an awful counter, and Tigra would have been much more difficult than she was. But instead, because it purifies all debuffs when she dashes back, period, separate from her personal abilities that apply to damaging buffs and would be turned off if she had any of her precision passives from throwing her special one recently. Because of the way it actually works, you're free to throw as much active DOT debuffs as you want. All that matters is that you don't throw passive ones, because those won't be shrugged and then they will be reflected. This is why Domino and Mojo and some others are having such a tough time this week. Or Awake and Domino, I should say. But given that correction, there are actually quite a few more counters for this fight than I thought. And even before I realized that, I thought that this was one of the more wide open ones. So let's go ahead and take a look at this Mysterio fight. So, if I had been correct in my original read of this node, then the game plan would have just been to build to special 3s and do as much damage as possible, and to not use any gas on poisons. However, because active DOT damage over time is safe, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to build to L3s, but along the way, basically every time she throws a special one, we're going to counter it with a heavy attack and convert our gas passives to poisons on her. Now, she is usually going to shrug them. That's okay. And we are going to stop doing this when we're getting close to the L3, because then we're going to save our gas to make the frenzy passive that he gets from the L3 last as long as possible for as much damage as possible. But especially if we can keep her aggressive and throwing specials while we have that poison on her, it's an easy way to lock in some extra damage. Now, you'll notice that starting this off, I am not doing an incredible job of controlling her AI, and I am getting backed up a bit, and that's why I've taken a little bit of damage. However, Mysterio has decent block proficiency, and now this special 3 will back her up, and hopefully we'll get into a bit better of a rhythm here. Because that's what we wanted right there. That heavy I should not have thrown. I should have just comboed to build more gas, because I really didn't do a lot of damage with that. And I put her into the falter part of her AI, where you can see she's just dashing forward and dashing back and leaving no real openings. So we really wasted most of the frenzy passive there. That was not a good first take, because I think I only got like 3 hits in before it expired once she stopped her falter business. However, we are staying open as much as possible. If she blocks without dashing back and it's safe for us to hit into her, then we're going to hit into her block to back her up and avoid that problem. But we've got plenty of room. Now, one thing you may have noticed on that last special one, and I think you may see it here as well, yeah, there it is that I am using a light attack to close the distance and then throwing Mysterio's heavy. The reach on Mysterio's heavy is pretty good, but the distance on his dashback is also pretty good as well. And this has been one of my favorite things about really getting comfortable with Tigra, is that the skills you learn to space her heavy counters apply to a lot of other champions almost more than they do with her. Because I have seen a couple different versions of this particular fight with Tigra. That is who I used for Mystics, like I said. And funnily enough, you actually don't have to use light attacks at all to fix the spacing with this. If you let her throw her heavy, she'll come up from her roll right in front of you without any adjustment, and you can safely counter. If she throws her L1, you can dash back and do nothing fancy and still land. And if you are in the right spot when she throws it, you can actually dash back twice and still land it. But all of that comes from the fact that Tigra has one of the best reaches on her heavies in the entire game. Like, she leaps forward and there are 2 quick hits, so even if the first one doesn't hit, the second one will. There are a lot of other characters, like Mysterio, who have much shorter reaches on their heavy, and who only land 1 hit. So the spacing is actually a lot more particular. This also came up on another Summer of Pain fight that I did with Reed against Mr. Sinister. There were a couple times where I was worried about losing Reed's pre-fight debuffs, and I was worried that I wouldn't get a parry heavy in, and so after Sinister's special 1, I threw some light attacks and then heavied to knock him down and lock them in that way. Same idea here with Mysterio, but what I'm getting at is that these characters with short reach, 1-hit heavies may actually need that skill you pick up from Tigra more than she does in some fights. So if you find yourself wanting to land heavy attacks in stun immune fights where you feel like the spacing just isn't lining up, take a lesson from all of those fancy Tigra videos on the internet and try it with someone like Mysterio. Because you see, that allowed us to land that 4,000 per tick poison right there, and only now did she dash back. We got almost all of the damage in from that. And otherwise, I just wouldn't have been able to do that without blocking a ton of hits and hoping that she threw her heavy. And because of the other part of this node, while she has the node's cruelty buff up, she can crit through block. So baiting out a heavy could be really punishing, especially if that was going to be something that I did on a regular basis. But because we're relying on her throwing her specials for us to get in those heavy opportunities, ever since that initial backup where I lost some extra health blocking some hits, I haven't taken any damage. Notice I'm still at 96% health. And this would actually go even faster if I were running recoil masteries, because I haven't been throwing any specials other than the special 3. Note that this is, of course, not with recoil masteries, so this is just what Mysterio does on his base kit. I also think that in my testing, his poisons do not benefit from boosts or from furies, which leads me to believe they probably wouldn't benefit from recoil masteries, in which case you'd just be getting more damage on the hits. But in this fight, that would be pretty good, and I definitely would be done by now. All told, Mysterio is not the same counter for this fight that Doom is. If you have Doom, this fight's definitely easier with him, and I do have Doom, but once I realized that I had misread the node, I was like, well, then I have to use Mysterio, because he can hit really hard on basics, and although he doesn't need his active damage over time, he has access to it, and I won't get punished for it. She'll just purify it. I also said in my first video that Spite was largely beneficial, and throughout this fight you've been seeing that in spades, because every time I want an opening, I'm not going for intercepts. That was the first hit I'd blocked in like 7 minutes or something. I'm not baiting out heavies. I'm not doing any of that. All I'm doing when I want openings is I'm backing up, intentionally triggering Dex, and leaving myself open so she throws a special. Now, she can go red if you're not careful. I realize that's a problem that a lot of people had with this fight, but I think if you intentionally trigger Dex rather than trying to avoid it and leave yourself open, and then finish your combos in ways that make you seem vulnerable to the AI, she will stay aggressive. I've actually been asked to make a video on AI management, and so I think I may elaborate on especially that combo part more in future videos, but I hope you saw some of it throughout here, because while this was not my first attempt with Mysterio, I did mess up one or two before this. I didn't have her go to an L3 once with any of my attempts with any characters. And so while I know that that can happen, and it is possible that the AI just tells you you lose this time, I think that there are a lot of ways to mitigate it that people just aren't as comfortable with. So watch what I do in here, watch how far away I'm staying, watch how much I'm triggering dexterity, watch how I end my combos, and then whether I choose to block or not. It requires some practice, it requires some reflexes, and I'll expand on it in the future, but hopefully that's helpful. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I love using Mysterio, and I am really excited about getting my hands on at least a 5-star penny sometime in the future, because this fight would have been so fast if I'd been able to spam those heavies. It could have been really cool. Looking forward to Mysterio getting supercharged. But let me know, again, who you guys ended up using in the comments, and I will catch you next time. Take care.